I know, there are a lot of Transformers kills videos out there already, but in this one, I'm gonna look across the continuities and try to figure out the most important, the most brutal, and the most heartbreaking. There's kills that change the entire course of history. There were kills that were just to give some con a robo-boner. We've got Hot Rod drowning a Decepticon in poop. We've got Optimus saying boobies. This is a long list, guys, so please take a second to hit like on the video, subscribe if you're new, maybe share it, but let's get started with
most impactful kill.
So this is what I call the Franz Ferdinand category. Not the band, but the Archduke, whose killing led to World War I. These are the ones that have had the largest repercussions for the Cybertronians and their timelines. And where else would we start but with Shockwave and his slaying of Onyx Prime. After he tried, and luckily failed, to collapse all of reality into a singularity which would feed Cybertron for energy, Shockwave was blasted back in time to what was known as the Barbarian Age. Period of Cybertronian history where the Knights of Cybertron had left the planet. See, these guys were credited with making Cybertron a sort of utopian paradise, and their departure left a void, which resulted in the slow decline of the civilization. Onyx, at this time, was a sort of shepherd. Like Jesus, that's right, like Jesus. Taking care of a band of mistreated Transformers and helping them scavenge whatever energon they could find in the barren deserts of Cybertron. Until one day, he came across another lost wandering soul. You guessed it, energon-starved, disorientated, angry. Shockwave took their hospitality, took some of their precious energon, and kablam! Killed Onyx where he stood to take his place in the timeline and begin the first of 1,000 manipulations. Course corrections in the timeline, which were all, of course, to his own benefit, and would ultimately lead to Unicron destroying Cybertron and wiping the slate clean for Shockwave to rebuild Cybertron as he saw fit. Now, I'm not saying that everything would have smelled of roses had the original Onyx kept his place in the timeline, but we do know that he was a kind and caring character. Like Jesus, Robo-Space Beast Jesus. One who inspired a myriad of Cybertronians to shun vehicle modes and adopt beast modes in honor of him. So he was clearly a hugely influential figure and a sort of nexus point of Cybertronian events. And his murder meant that Shockwave could sway the entire course of history of Cybertron, and as a result, a vast swathe of the galaxy. Anyway, more on Onyx and the other primes in an upcoming video, so make sure you're all subscribed up for that. Next contender for most impactful kill would be Solus Prime. So you probably know that Primus created the Primes to help in the fight against Unicron, and Solus was the creator. She had an almost mystic ability to forge any device or weapon that imagination could conceive. She was well liked by the other Primes, but she was loved by Megatronus. Persuaded by him to create the Requiem Blaster, a device that he claimed would help them defeat Unicron, the other Primes saw that he was kind of moody and got worried that he would use it to become unstoppable should he ever decide to turn on them.
Rest.
And I know this thing doesn't look anything special, but it's actually like the Death Star in a handheld weapon. So this division appeared in the Primes, with Solus having misgivings about the weapon herself. I built this thing, but I don't know if it's gonna build the thing, maybe it's gonna build the thing, maybe. So their battle with Unicron resulted in a narrow victory, but unbeknownst to them, left them a little bit more susceptible to the dark sides of their personalities. And of course, Megatronus had the darkest of dark sides. So he was like,
I'll just take this now.
and she was like, "K, why?"
And he was like, 'cause I have a special cupboard to put it in.
And she was like, "Don't you go lie to me! You lied to me about the cheesecake! Don't you lie to me about this! You always got down!" Megatronus and Solus argued, an argument that escalated into a physical fight and culminated in Megatron firing a shot from the Requiem Blaster without thinking, a shot which would kill Solus. As she died, she told Megatronus that she still loved him, in a moment that must have ripped him up inside and sent him insane, lighting an inferno of rage inside him and setting him on the path that led him to becoming the first Decepticon and the being known as the Fallen.
But wait, there's more.
But after her death, Solus's body melted down into the core of Cybertron, which combined with Onyx Prime's sacrifice, long story for a different time, created a font of sparks that would spawn millions of new lives, and that would become the Cybertronian race. So this moment right here is pivotable. Pivotable? What the fuck is pivotable? Like you can pivot it? Is no doubt one of the most important moments in Cybertronian history. But another we should mention, even though it's not a kill exactly, is Cybertron itself. So what I mean is the moment in the War for Cybertron game where Megatron finally gets control of the dark energon that Starscream has been sitting on up there in the space station doing God knows what with, and uses it to poison the core of the planet. Now, as I said, it doesn't kill the planet altogether, but it does force it into a long period of dormancy. I think at one point it said in the game that it will take millions of years to recover, and all this because the dark energon has made it so that it can't produce any of the life-giving energon that sustains the Cybertronians, prompting the mass exodus of the Autobots, which inevitably winds up in the finding of Earth, and probably a stepping up in the Decepticons' conquest of the galaxy, as I'm sure that the sourcing of energon to fuel their war effort would have become top priority, even if it meant enslaving or maybe even exterminating a few innocent worlds in the process. Let's talk about Dinobot. He saved a Bambi, he rode tarantulas like a motorbike but in some sort of weird cross-legged yoga pose, he lived as a warrior, he died as a warrior. Dinobot's death in Beast Wars was one of the greatest sacrifices in Beast Wars, and quite possibly the entire franchise. In a bid to stop Megatron altering the future by killing all of humanity before it can emerge or evolve or whatever, from these hideous numbskulls, Dinobot throws himself into impos odds to save you, yes you and me and your mama, and all of these basic brain monkey people who preceded us. Did they ever know who saved them? Did they ever stop picking their bottoms long enough to see that their own doom was staring them right in the eye? But old Chopperface went in swinging, burning with the fury of 1,000 fiery suns, shoving Waspinator, the future ruler of the proto-humans by the way, right up Rampage's tank cannon. He was well on the way to cutting Inferno clean in half when Black Arachnia opened up on him, forcing him to use Inferno as a human shield, then blowing his head off with his own blaster. Beating Quickstrike with his bare hands, and then taking on Megatron with only 4% power reserves remaining, with, what, I hear you ask, a fusion cannon, one of those guns that spits out like a little black hole that sucks in all your enemies but conveniently nothing else? No! A stick! But not just any stick, a tactical stick. You know what makes it a tactical stick? That pointy fucking pebble loosely tied to the end. Then saved our mutual great, the power of 20 granddad over here before using the last of his robo juice to do this. Old Chopperface then slipped peacefully into the dying of the light, having saved a whole entire civilization of fucking morons, but nonetheless, but also having given them the power of tactical sticks, enabling them to better kill things, each other, whatever, just kill it. They brought old Chopperface back as Dinobot 2, but it could never ever hope to top this. It never felt right to me. Like, this is the death the character deserved. This. Without him, there would have been no spiced latte memes, no skibbity toilet. You wouldn't be able to tune in to watch streamers sleeping. Any of the wonders of the modern world. So on behalf of the human race, I salute you, the most honorable of Saurian Grumpy Pants. So to us as the human race, his death would be the most impactful kill. But when you think about the Transformers history and the history of, the Transformers universe as a whole, you've got to give it to Solus. Her death spawned the entire Cybertronian race, plus the first Decepticon. And we all know where that led. Next up! The award for most just die already kill would go to Smokescreen from Armada. Check this performance out. Oh, I've shortened this quite a bit, by the way, but he's not dead yet.
Megatron, sir.
Let's do most predictable kill. Yeah, definitely not the most exciting of the categories, but contenders for this one would be Optimus's death in Revenge of the Fallen. That one was about as predictable as butthole burn after Taco Bell. You knew it was only a matter of time before the movie producers tried to yank all those sentimental heartstrings to cash in on a moment that affected all of our childhoods and perhaps contributed just a little bit to the person you are today. It was pretty obvious that he was coming back at the end, right? There's no way they would have the balls to kill him off especially not after last time. Lols. One that I definitely saw coming was Pyro in Last Stand of the Wreckers. So this is the guy that loved Optimus, man. I mean, loved him, ever since Prime saved him in the Simanzi massacre. Anyway, he got recruited into the Wreckers by Springer and was involved in the retaking of the infamous prison Garrus 9 from Overlord. Now, if the fact that this guy was just too similar to Optimus wasn't enough, like he even changed his body so he could look more like him, you could tell his writing was on the wall when he refused to sacrifice himself to access the prison's mainframe. Basically, it came down to either him or Iron Fist, and he was like, well, my destiny is, too great for this shit. So, Iron Fist, you go right ahead and sacrifice yourself. Go on, off you go. Anyway, Topspin ended up being the one to give his spark, but Pyro had already shown his true colors. He did atone a little later though, as he stayed behind to fend off a horde of Decepticons whilst the rest of his crew escaped. And Pyro was ripped limb from limb. But the one that really surprised no one was Cliffjumper's death in Bumblebee, a character that's become synonymous with dying in stuff, even though he hasn't actually died that many times in stuff. I mean, think about it. How many times have you actually seen him die in stuff? I can think of 3, maybe? In Transformers Prime, he died in the early episodes, which was memorable because it set the tone for the entirety of what was to come in that show, and set it a whole load darker than anyone was expecting. There's just something about it. Starscream doing the deed with his bare hand, the sound as the metal scrapes, the blood hitting the floor, like the fact that they made it the blood purple, changes absolutely nothing about how horrific this is. In fact, what was more surprising was the fact that he didn't die in the Fall of Cybertron video game. Remember the guy who everyone knew was going to lose his arm in Hot Tub Time Machine? And everyone was like, oh, this must be it. This is the moment where the arm's coming off. Well, that's what I was like with Cliff in Fall of Cybertron. This is the moment. Anyway, the moment never came, but the point is, no one was surprised when he got chopped lengthways in Bumblebee. Were they? Loosely related side thought, who do you think has died the most in all of Transformers? I don't know, but I'm guessing it's not who you think. Right now, I'm coming for your heartstrings with most heartbreaking kill. There are quite a few contenders for this spot, and at the end of the day, it's pretty hard to boil it down, but the most obvious would be, of course, Grey Prime from Transformers 86, a moment that etched itself into many of our childhoods. But you know what? I'll be talking about that one more later. So let's start with the most recent one, and that would be Air Razor's death from Rise of the Beasts. From my own personal standpoint, I was always a little bit meh about Air Razor in the 19s cartoon. It wasn't until her death in the final episodes of Season 3 that I actually started to warm up to her. But in this movie, it was a whole different story. She felt big, she felt powerful, she was second only to Optimus Primal. I mean, we only got a real small glimpse of what Rhinox could do, didn't we? She was like the voice of reason too, and therefore she was one of the easiest to get attached to. So when Scourge put that rust tick on her back and she started going all the nuts, Primal had to suffocate one of his oldest friends, something that clearly tore him up inside. You could see the pain on his face. And for us, well, if you're used to the Transformers franchise, you'll be used to seeing characters come back from the dead all the time. So anytime a bot gets the true death, it's pretty shocking. So that's one contender. Some might mention Canopy's death in Last Night, but he just kind of appeared, he was there for 5 minutes, and then gone the next. She didn't really get any time to get attached to him, so I'm brushing that one aside. One that was more poignant to me was Ratchet's death. Not because I was all attached to this character, but because Ratchet was just there as a medic, man, first and foremost, he never did anything to deserve this kind of brutality. Having his spark ripped out like this, Jesus. Scorponok having his face melted off by Unicron Bath right here tugged strangely on my heartstrings, as he'd just made a temporary truce with Prime and the Autobots to fight Unicron. And as he lay there dying, well, I talked about that plenty in this video right here, didn't I? You watched that video, right? Let's do most shocking kill. So in Cyberverse, Drift was actually a Decepticon spy called Deadlock. He infiltrated the Autobots and rose to a position of prominence, and when he finally revealed his true nature as a spy, he viciously attacked Hot Rod in an attempt to get the Allspark, stabbing him through the chest. Hot Rod then grabs him around the neck, then plunges them both into a pool of toxic waste, and they both disappear beneath the surface. Hot Rod later reappears, but Drift never does, implying that Hot Rod drowned the Decepticon spy in toxic waste. Oh my god. So Ravage of Stanix was a great character in the IDW 2005 continuity. The greatest infiltrator in the Decepticon ranks, had friendships with Soundwave and Megatron that lasted millennia. Megatron, becoming an Autobot, sent shockwaves through the ranks of the Decepticons, making many prominent figures question their standing, their place in the grand scheme of things. Ravage had a complicated conflicted standpoint, with his loyalties to Megatron at odds with his own personal hatred of the Autobots. But all the same, he was one of the very few that stood by Megatron even when old Buckethead here became hated by both the Decepticons and the Autobots. Like, the Autobots even threw fuck off Megatron parties. So when Tarn came after his former mentor and hero, and after Megatron declared that he wouldn't fight, Tarn goaded him out of hiding by getting hold of Ravage and, well, see for yourself. His death wasn't completely in vain though, as it enraged Megatron enough to rip his way through the DJD attackers and eventually give Tarn a big giant spoonful of the true death. Nom 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 nom. What I wasn't expecting was in Transformers G.I. Joe, where Bumblebee died at the hands and tentacles of Serpentor after he stole the Matrix from Optimus and got all the Prime superpowers and plot armor and became Serpentor Prime. It was a surprise because it felt pretty random, you know, and isn't made a particularly big deal of considering he's one of the most popular characters. Anyway, Serpentor crushed the gold bot with his tentacles and then explained how he felt something leave the bot's body as he died, which is pretty dark. And then seeing his statue at the end of the comic, I don't know. I was never attached to Bumblebee, but you know, here, it was like they snuffed him out and then kind of just brushed him under the carpet. Oh yeah, here's a statue. Bye. Killing off half of the original cast in G1 was what sprung straight into my head when thinking about this category. I know it's not just one character who gets killed here, but it is one big chop of the axe. With one fell swoop, the writers, the producers, extinguished half of our heroes, didn't they? In what came to be known as the Great Toy Massacre of 1986. And it's got to be summed up with this. And yep, this is Prowl being blasted by Scavenger at the start of the 86 movie. I'm sure if you were a kid in the 80s, you rocked up into this movie to say you rocked up to this movie to see your favorite characters, but no, fuck them and fuck you, they're dead by minute 10. Now let's use this death in particular to encapsulate the feeling. Apparently, all of the smoke that we see here is caused by the shot hitting his spark chamber and igniting, catching fire, burning him from the insides out, leaving him choking, suffocating on the fumes emanating from the searing and disintegration of his own charring organs. And yeah, that's how the fans felt. Another one that I found pretty shocking was Agent Blur from Transformers Animated. This incarnation of Blur was a member of the elite Cybertronian Guard. Not just any old intelligence agent, but an amphetamine-boosted sleeper agent. And the fact that the Autobots adopted him as one of their own is kind of surprising, right? You got this guy bouncing off every fucking wall in the room going, and no one raised an eyebrow to go, should we maybe background check this guy? No, I'm fine. Anyway, he was working on a mission for Autobot High Command to covertly keep an eye on Prime and his activities on Earth. Then he discovered that Shockwave was another spy within the Autobot ranks. So he was like, Long Arm, I think we've got a spy, I think Shockwave's... And Long Arm was like, yes, 'tis I, the harbinger of your doom or something. Blur managed to dodge Long Arm's cannon blasts, but Shockwave managed to trap him in the nearby service tunnels, sealing him into a dead end and then slowly crushing him between the moving doors. Find peace, Speedy brother. Find peace. Does anyone remember that old movie, Krull? There's this bit where this big friendly Cyclops gets crushed in between this door, and it traumatized me, man. Every time I see a Cyclops, I throw myself in front of him like a human shield, and I'm like, nobody cross this Cyclops! And then, it turns out there's no Cyclops there. The way to go is to find the fucking manager. After this, Shockwave handed Blur's remains, which had been squished down into this cube, to Cliffjumper. He then threw it in a trash compactor or something, or an incinerator or something, until his remains were discovered by Sari Sumdak, who revived him with her residual energy, although he was still just a cube. She then tapped into his remaining life force and used his speed to beat Kremzeek, before Prime and Jazz used the Allspark to restore his body. Alright, the next contender is kind of surprising, shocking, in a sort of unbelievable sense. So remember how Robots in Disguise is a kind of a crappy follow-up to Transformers Prime? Well, it shits all over how powerful the Predacons, Skylinks, and Darksteel were too, as RID Starscream at one point recounts a flashback where he was fleeing from them before he found a room full of Megatron's super weapons and accidentally stepped on a big red button which triggered one of them and destroyed Skylinks and basically I'm shocked at how little sense this makes. So the contenders are Hot Rod drowning Drift, Tarn ripping Ravage to pieces, Bumblebee being tentacled to death, the Great Massacre of 86, Blur being crushed, or Starscream somehow killing Skylynx and Darkseid. But you gotta give it to that 1986 toy massacre, which ruined many childhoods. The most would have to go to anything in Kiss Players, just because this is a maelstrom of creepy weirdness. Like, where else could you see an Autobot's arm get impaled by a 30-foot wiener that's just been projected out of a Megatron clone's mouth? Before it gets decapitated, its severed head nearly crushing a young girl, a very young girl, with said appendage just flopping, lolling around. Ugh. Skytread fell into a sea of poop. What kind of poop? Well, I'll tell you, poop enthusiasts. Worm poop. And his day only got worse from there.
Explanation, please.
Okay, here we go. After he just managed to get the prized matrix of combination, the cliff he was climbing collapsed, dropping him in an ocean of worm excrement created by the gazillions of these little guys. And once he was in there, yeah, see for yourself. Yep, they ate his face off. There's even one right here that's eaten right the way through his head.
Nice.
Don't know why I'm laughing. There was Getaway's death, where he was eaten by the very scraplets he had tried to kill the crew of the Lost Light with. Basically, in a deal with the horrendous Cybertronian serial killer Sunder, who wanted to eat 25 of the crew's spinal cords, Getaway figured that the best way to strip them down would be to fill an oil reservoir full of these. But later in his final conflict with Cyclonus and Hot Rod, Getaway had a vision of Primus, confirming his deluded belief that he was Primus's chosen, and vindicating all of the horrific deeds that he'd committed. Unfortunately for him though, it was just the scraplets who'd gained the ability to project visions by interfacing with planet Medary systems, and Getaway was slowly, gradually, and painfully devoured. Like, look at this, there's so many of these things that they're just coming out through his mouth, one comes out through his eye. Don't know why I'm laughing. This one is especially brutal because it gave Breakaway his heart's one true desire before ripping it all away and subjecting him to a savage death. A disappointment he deserved, and a death he deserved. The most brutal section would also be the section where we talk about the DJD. Oh boy. They have numerous brutal kills to their name, being a faction that specializes in spreading fear through brutality. We could talk about the time Voss forced Rewind to film him killing Chrome Dome with his own Nemo surgery needles, which, considering that Rewind would co-junct Endura with Chrome Dome, meant that it was basically like being forced to watch your spouse having needles shoved into their eyes. Who writes this stuff? Or we could talk about poor old Croc. Croc was a Decepticon scavenger. After the DJD caught up with them because they were harboring their latest target, Fulcrum, the DJD swiftly got to work as only the DJD know how. Kaon grabbed a hold of Croc and forced him to watch his buddy flywheels get fed headfirst into Helix's abdominal grinder. Blood and chunks go flying, even this eyeball. But it ain't over yet because Voss, clicks off his faceplate and ka-ching, shoves it onto Croc's face. Who then accidentally got blasted by another of the scavengers who was aiming for Kaon. So, forced to watch his friend die, then had his face mutilated, then shot by a friend. Yep.
Brutal.
Trailblazer has the special ability to create force fields, which has saved him and the other Autobots many, many times. But it was ultimately his undoing in a pretty brutal way. At least it was in IDW's 2005 continuity. Something brutal in IDW 2005? No! So we had this thing, kind of like a panic attack that he'd get in stressful situations, where he would involuntarily generate a force field around him. Most people just shit. Anyway, long story short, in an encounter with the DJD, guess what happens? Yep, he gets stuck inside his own force field, his Autobot buds go off to get help. You just stay right there, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. Oh, you died? Knowing that Voss is outside the field, but not knowing that Kaon is in there with him. Kaon mercilessly, viciously tore him to pieces before pulling out his brain module and crushing it against the side of his own force field. And that was it for Trailcutter, as durable as the Cybertronians are, but if your spark or your brain module is damaged, that is it. So he died the true death, at least as far as the 2005 continuity was concerned. But of course, the DJD's most brutal kill was probably Black Shadow, a Decepticon that betrayed the faction for a shed load of money, and when the DJD caught up with him, he was melted in Helix's built-in smelting chamber. Tesaurus ground his legs off in the rotating grinder that made up his torso. He was then electrocuted in Kaon's electric chair alt mode, then finally talked to death by Tarn using his Voice of God ability that gradually slowed and eventually stopped his spark. But because he was a phase 6er, This was a kill that just seemed to go on forever. The amount of excruciating pain this guy was put through shows an unparalleled brutality. But you know what? This guy probably deserved it, as he was responsible for many, many, many innocent deaths. I've got a video about the worst massacres in Transformers history on the list, and I'll talk more about that one then. Described as a firepower-packing, never-giving-up war titan, Iaconus was a super powerful titan that needed battle and conflict and bloodshed and breakfast bagels. It's early and I'm hungry, give me a break. I can't wait to talk about this guy more in my vid about more powerful titans, but in short, it was awoken to fight the Quintessence. Now, after Starscream turned out to be behind the whole thing, he summoned a lovely geometrical triangle portal of doom to smother Iaconus' head in unspace and essentially teleport his head to another dimension. Barbaric? Sure, but considering that Iaconus probably would have gone on to lay waste to the whole planet, maybe it was for the best. There is, of course, some fierce brutality in the baverse, but I'm going to come back to that later. Out of this bunch, it's got to be one of the DJD ones. I'm going to give it to Voss, forcing Rewind to film the murder of his spouse. A lot of the other DJD kills are Decepticons who've done pretty bad stuff themselves. This one wasn't. Let's do most self-sacrificey kill. That doesn't sound right. Best self-sacrifice. Let's do that. And let's start with Prowl. Saved by Optimus Prime when he fell behind in a battle in an earlier episode, Cyberverse Prowl got to repay the favor when Shadow Striker fired on Optimus as he was battling Megatron, diving in front of the Prime, taking the bullet for him, and then succumbing to his injuries. Not as memorable as, that other death perhaps, but noteworthy all the same. Soundwave sacrificed himself in Cyberverse to kill Tarn, summoning all of the boombox energy he possibly could muster and unleashing the bass to fuck. So much bass that life forms on planets light years away suddenly violently evacuated their bowels for no obvious reason. Any creature less durable than a Transformer, that is, less tough than a Sherman tank inside a nuclear bunker inside one of those jackets that John Wick wears, like one a really big one. You get the gist. Just a whole Russian doll of fucking layers of armor. Anything less durable than that is going in the face of all that bass. So much bass that it left a crater where Tarn used to be standing, and even Shockwave himself. If he hadn't have done this, Tarn would have got control of the Cortex helm and taken control of the Decepticons as well as his own super troops to eliminate the Autobots and quite probably everyone else who stood in his way. If he hadn't have done this, all that would have stood between us and a fate worse than death would have been our last line of defense. In Transformers Cyberverse, Blur wasn't from Cybertron, he was from a colony called Velocitron, or as it was otherwise known, the Speed Planet. You know those salt flats that they break land speed records on? Well, it's a whole planet of that, and the natives have become obsessed with speed and racing, and always searching for ways to go faster. And that's where Cyberverse Blur is from. Anyway, it's not exactly relevant, I just found it interesting. When faced with an outbreak of Rust Plague, Blur stayed behind to operate a space bridge and allow the others to escape. Realizing that he had caught the plague himself, Blur volunteered to stay behind rather than risk spreading the fatal disease, and was covered by the rust and quickly eroded to nothing. Right, yeah, we got to talk about Starscream's sacrifice
in Armada,
which not only brought to a close one of the greatest character arcs in Transformers history, but also resulted in the bots and the cons reaching a truce and joining forces to fend off you-know-who. Moving on. Nobody said that self-sacrifices had to be noble, did they? Because Cyberverse Shockwave also paid the ultimate price for his cause. After being ordered to by Megatron, Shockwave unhesitantly used a spark extractor on himself, upon which his body fell lifeless to the ground, and his spark energy inhabited and infected the Allspark, his evil essence attempting to destroy the artifact from inside. Cheetor then had to sacrifice himself to purify it with his own essence of good, I guess, which nullified Shockwave's essence and actions and erased his ass from existence. Of course, Dinobot self-sacrifice would qualify him for this as well, but I'm gonna give it to Shockwave because just like killing yourself, that's just so messed up.
Here I am, just minding my own business.
Right at the start of the War for Cybertron video game, Megatron smelts this grunt for like back-talking him. That was pretty uncalled for. Megsy must have just been like, it's just a Vacon, it. Because Breakdown back-talks him way worse later in the game. There was this one moment in Season 2 of Transformers Prime where Megatron tosses a couple of Vacons off of the Nemesis. Like, you two, off you go, carry out whatever the mission is. And he grabs them while they're in robot mode and tosses them over the side. And as they're falling, one transforms into a plane and flies off. Okay, no problem there, off I go, woo! But the second one turns into a car, and he's just like, until I guess his face met the dirt at God knows what speed. There was the time Scorponok yeeted one of his own guys into a canyon for looking at him in Regeneration 1. Bonk. Basically, Scorponok had Perceptor working on his latest Doomsday device that would turn all Autobot sparks into Decepticon sparks. And there were just these constant problems with the device, so Scorponok was getting all wound up. Then he notices this guy just standing there and boing! There was also the time he crushed Misfire's head just for asking a question, which I don't know, maybe that's questioning orders, which by the Decepticon playbook, is provocation. Yeah, I don't know, I might scrap that one. But the one I'm going to give it to is Shockwave being subjected to Imperator, which may not have killed him entirely, but it did kill any personality the guy may have had. Yeah, apparently before this he had quite the razzmatazz going on, wearing bright colors and being super impassioned about stuffs, and this was all replaced by the cold unfeelingness of logic. I'd love to see his former character restored at one point just to see his reaction to all the fucked up shit he's done. Oh, haven't I been naughty? But no, seriously, this one is unprovoked because of the fact that Imperator is meant to be a punishment for the worst of ill deeds. And what did he do to deserve this? He tried to set up Shockwave's school for gifted bots. Bots with superpowers. And you know who hated bots with superpowers? This guy. But wait, what's this? A late entry? Some would say that executing Scavenger, for a bot that had gone to ground and was, at that stage at least, running for his life, was pretty unprovoked. But I'm pretty sure that I read somewhere that he did some fairly heinous stuff before arriving on Earth, including murdering Autobot settlements back on Cybertron. So I've got a feeling that his death was probably justified. Late entry disqualified. So this is a category that's going to be packed with Bayverse moments.
Awesome pussycat.
Because Michael Bay does crazy kills like no other.
Barbecue.
I think that the most famous of all the Bayverse kills would be the giving your face moment, a moment that will live in infamy, where Prime levers off the Fallen's faceplate, revealing a whole load of Robo-Skull underneath. But Sideswipe chopping a whole Decepticon in half whilst doing a cartwheel has at least got to get a mention, as does Bulkhead ripping the Robo-entrails out of this poor Vacon, which provokes an equally ludicrous reaction from Marco. Is Marco her name, right? What's her name again? But I think my favorite, perhaps of all the Bayverse kills, would be Prime shoving his hooks into Grindor's face and ripping his head to absolute shreds. Like, we got an eyeball in there, we got pieces of what must be a brain module, we got, I can't believe that someone on the classification board didn't pause and think, well, I know this is a robot, but still kind of harsh, don't you think? Farmer killing Ambulon was pretty ludicrous in a horrific way. And I mean, any death by chainsaw is ludicrous in its savagery, but this one is just one example of Farmer having lost his damn mind. So Farmer was once a respected medic and Nemo-surgeon, but had to strike up a bargain with Tarn, which involved him supplying the leader of the DJD with transformation cogs from dead bots, in exchange for being left alone. Somewhere along the line, though, he became just a little too fond of the process and started snuffing out patients who had nothing wrong with them. And as he spiraled more and more out of control, we saw him torturing Ratchet in a pretty twisted way, and then, well, he did this to his former friend Ambulon. Hound blowing this guy's head off with a cigar had to be on here somewhere. Somewhere in the comments said it was basically just an artillery shell that he'd been chomping on the whole time, which is pretty funny, him just picturing him seeing a crate of ordnance and going, that looks like it'll smoke up real good. But let's just take a second to appreciate his mouth dexterity here. Like, he tosses the thing up in the air, spins it around, then catches it, all with his mouth. He got some pretty serious mouth skills there, and that sounds weird, doesn't it? Stop it! Stop it, you dirty-minded people! But I think that the most ludicrous, the most unbelievable one that I've come across goes to Megatron's killing of the D-Void's avatar, known as the Decepticon. So the D-Void was this extra-dimensional entity, like this cosmic horror being, who came through to our dimension and basically possessed every single Decepticon on Cybertron and managed to get them to combine together in this kaiju-sized beast. But Megatron, powered with only his own rage, goes full Doomslayer and manages to take it down by himself. Now, I love the whole Doomslayer thing. I love the fact that, you know, this guy's so angry he could kill anything. But every single Decepticon is present here. Just think about that.
Ludicrous.
Now let's do the most awesome, the most top kill. In the runners-up position, I mean, what more is there to say about Optimus, his death in Transformers 86? The kill that instantly became iconic. It shocked, it angered, it broke hearts, and it eventually got backpedaled as Hasbro realized what a huge pile of shit they just stepped in. Killing off everyone's favorite character probably did seem like a good idea at the time, but the problem was they just couldn't follow it up with anything remotely in the same league. But the top kill, just the overall best death in all of the continuities, the one that tops them all, the one that ticks all the boxes, the most heart-wrenching, the most painful, but also the most beautiful and hopeful, is actually a Transformers suicide. It's the one that moved me more than any other in the franchise, and that's Optimus's death at the end of Transformers Prime, or Beast Hunters Predacons Rising if you want to get exact. He gave his farewell speech and declared the end of the Age of Primes, saying goodbye one last time to all of these characters who each and every one owed him their lives, before flying into the Well of Sparks and rejoining the heart of Cybertron. It's a moment that still gives me goosebumps and was a perfect way to close one of my favorite chapters in Transformers history. The end of an era, and the perfect way to round off this video. Guys, I gotta bounce. I gotta go take my meds. So thank you very much for spending this time with me. Thank you for all of your support of the channel. I'm back. I'm gonna be getting videos out regularly. So I will see you very soon for the next one. Thanks very much for watching, and cheerio, bye.